All right, thank you all so much for coming to hear this talk today. I'm going to spend the next 30 minutes, give or take, talking about techniques to become an effective agent of change in your organization. Techniques really to communicate well and drive changes with people that you work with. Before I start, I'll say a few words about myself, and you can probably tell from my voice. I often describe myself these days as a Canadian with an English accent or an Englishman with a Canadian passport. I'll leave it up to you to decide which one is more appropriate. I'm also a former musician, a former professional musician. Currently, I'm a software developer. And I'm a senior principal developer at Oracle here in the Waterloo, Ontario office in Canada. So to explain why the topics in this talk are relevant, I really want to start by looking at what changes when you become a very senior individual contributor. And to summarize that, or for me, the first time I began to realize that a very fundamental change was going on was when a director I worked with said this to me after I was initially promoted to principal developer. And he said to me, "You're a manager now, but you manage from the perspective of the code." And to dig a little bit more into why that is such a fundamental change, I want to think about the general career levels that we see in our industry. So I'm using here the job titles that we use here at Oracle in Canada. I think these 6 levels are fairly consistent across our industry, but you might have different titles for these jobs. I've seen principal developers referred to as staff developers, architects as distinguished developers, etc. But I think these 6 levels represent the standard kind of progression in our industry. And what I'm contending is that when you get to principal level or above, a very fundamental shift happens in your career. I would say that up to and including your time as a senior developer, your contribution is largely assessed on the code that you write, your contribution of delivering features, delivering code to customers as part of a team. However, at principal level and above, things start to change because you are often now no longer part of a single team. You're working with multiple teams, with multiple people. You're assessed now on how you enable others. And that requires a fundamentally very different skill set than you needed beforehand when you were writing code more on a day-to-day basis. What you're doing now is technical leadership, and leadership is all about working with people. So some of the differences I think we see in expectations. First of all, as I've kind of already said here, up to a senior developer, you deliver code and features as part of a team primarily. Principal developer and above, you're largely expected to enable others to deliver code and features. Up to senior developer, including senior developer, you're working in an engineering direction often defined by others. Principal developer and above, you are actively influencing and defining the engineering direction for teams, for entire units of companies, for very large companies, for entire products altogether. Another big difference is that as part of a team, your primary focus is going to be on short-term feature-driven work. Short-term here could be months, right? It could be months to get a feature completed, could be months or years to get an entire product completed, but your typical turnaround time for completing something is going to be measured in a few days at most, a sprint, possibly a couple of weeks. As a very senior IC, a lot of your work is going to be extremely long-term and strategic. You might be promoting changes or driving technical changes or making technical changes happen. They will take many months to come to full fruition, or sometimes even years. And the last thing I'll say here, to sum up, is that one of the big differences that, as a team member, you're spending your time implementing features, implementing code. Whereas a very senior IC, a lot of your time is going to be spent exploring, looking into different ideas, different techniques. So you're an engineering leader, but one of the big differences for you, as opposed to someone with a management title, is that you lead without authority. And what I mean by authority is that for managers, for directors, for vice presidents, for CEOs, there comes an authority, an assumed authority with those positions, that these people have control over budgets, they have control over hiring, firing, promotions, pay raises, all of these things. Now, the best managers, really don't use that authority very often. They don't need to. They inspire people in other ways. but everyone knows that it's there, that there is some authority to just say, make this happen, let's do this. You don't have any of that. Remember, you're a leader, but you lead from the perspective of the code. And what this means is that you need to drive engineering change. You need to make things happen without any assumed authority. Everyone knows that you can't fire people, that you don't even have authority probably to get budget for some of these things. So how you go about delivering change without authority is a fundamental part of the job that you need to contend with. The first piece of advice I'll give you, and this really is a sub-theme for this entire talk, is that at this level, everything is a people problem. You will spend probably a lot of your time wishing that you were writing code again, because fundamentally, code is a lot easier than people. We call dealing with people soft skills, but of course there's nothing soft or easy about it. So your job is to convince people that the thing you're driving, the thing you want them to do, the change you want them to make is the right way forwards. This is a very difficult problem in software engineering because we hire fundamentally smart, intelligent people who like to think. And those kinds of people will question every single thing that you ask them to do. So not only do you not have authority, you're in a position where every single thing you ask people to do will be questioned. You're expected to justify, explain why what you're doing, why what you're asking them to do is the best thing. And as you can see, fundamentally here, we're talking about a very, very different skill set from anything you've ever had to do in the rest of your career up until now as a developer. So at this point, I'll put a big disclaimer here. I'm coming at this from the perspective of a student myself. I'm as much of a learner in these things as any of you are. I'm going to share today some ideas I think that work well for me, have worked well with teams I work with. You will also have your own ideas, and in fact, I would love to hear them. Feel free to share them. But I'm as much of a student of this and looking to get better as anyone else is. So let's talk about, to start with, driving technical change. Because, one of the big expectations of you at principal level and above is that you will identify new things technically, changes technically that will benefit the company, benefit the groups you work with, and make those changes happen. And of course, this is a people problem, as we said, right? You need to persuade people to do these things. And there are many different change management techniques that talk about how to bring changes to organizations. Things such as plan, do, check, act, awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, reinforcement, and Kotter. But for me, fundamentally, I think those techniques address the people side of changing an organization. I think there are also 4 underlying principles, though, that support technical change in an organization. That these will be complementary to whatever change management technique you choose to use, or if you don't choose to use one at all. These 4 underlying pillars will support you when you're trying to drive a technical change in an organization. And these pillars are mandate, measurement, accountability, and enablement. I want to spend a few minutes talking about each one of these in turn and explaining what I mean by using these words. So let's start with mandate. And quite simply put, mandate is who has the authority to declare that a particular change is going to happen, that it's what the company wants to do. So you need to think about who it is who can state that that change is going to happen to the people you're working with. The principle here that I find for myself is that the bigger the change I want to drive, the greater the authority is required to say it needs to happen. If I'm suggesting a change in a development practice or techniques to a team I work with, or a couple of teams I work with, I probably have the authority to do that myself. Within the group that I work in a group of around 80 developers around the world. I'm probably going to need some more support from some of our management, from some other senior principal developers, etc. And if I'm trying to drive the change in the product I work in for all of the developers, which is about 1,000 developers worldwide, I'm probably going to need some pretty powerful support, going up to senior vice presidents and possibly global vice president sort of level to get that kind of buy-in. So really think about who is it who can give the authority needed to drive the change you want. Fundamentally, though, you need to identify allies around the company that you work in, people who can help you drive this change. and build consensus. For me, mandate is not about dictating to people that this is the thing we're doing. This will work best when you can explain why this change is desirable, get people on side, build a consensus that this is the thing we have to do, and then make it happen. So once you have your mandate in place, you need to set up a measurement. And fundamentally, you cannot optimize what you can't measure. You need to be able to measure progress towards achieving a goal so that you can tell everyone what it is. And fundamentally here, you need to be able to make it crystal clear to anyone, from CEO down all the way down to the junior developers, what is that progress towards meeting whatever goal it is, whatever mandate it is we're driving towards. And this is really something that you will have to decide yourself, that you need to understand how is the change going to be measured and then tell everyone about it. What you really want to avoid at all costs is lots of different ways of measuring this thing you're trying to drive, which will give slightly different results. Everyone's got a slightly different understanding. You need to be able to find one way of measuring how we're doing on this change and making sure that everyone is using that. So once measurement's in place, the next thing you really need to consider, for me, is accountability. And accountability is one of those words which can have a somewhat negative connotation. It can make people think they're going to get blamed, that they're going to be, told off for not succeeding. So for me, accountability fundamentally is not about blame. It's about getting people invested. It's about getting everyone to get skin in the game so that they are bought into making the change happen. For large-scale changes, you can't do it on your own. Right? You can't be the only person trying to drive this. You will burn yourself out. So you need to bring people in and make them responsible for deriving this change with the teams, with the people that they work with, make them accountable for explaining how it's happened. And with accountability, what I really want to do is to create an environment where everyone can surface how they're doing. How are they being successful? How are they failing? I really believe that it's not a problem. If someone's making an honest effort on a mandate, on something we're trying to drive, and they haven't achieved the result that we wanted, that's totally fine. What I need to know is, why were they not successful? What do they need? What was missing to allow them to succeed? So then I can try and unblock them and provide that and make things better. So accountability should be to create an environment where people can explain their successes and failures. Fundamentally, I think you want to celebrate success. No matter how small that success is, celebrate it. Understand where people are having problems so that you can do better. And a lot of this might involve creating some sort of ceremony, whether it's, whoever it needs to be in front of, where people come together, talk about to some manager, some director, some CEO about how this is going, make it happen on a regular basis so that we really get visibility into all of this. So the last thing I'll talk about here is enablement. And in a way, putting this last is a bit of a disservice, because enablement underpins pretty much everything else that we've set up to this point. It underpins mandate, measurement, and accountability. Fundamentally, enablement is making sure that if we're saying to people, this change is desirable, we need to make this happen, we need to make sure that everyone has the skills and tools to make it happen. And I see this as almost like a pact between management and senior individual contributors and the teams that are implementing this. Because if I'm asking people to make a change, I have to in return say, and I will do whatever it takes to make sure that you can succeed at this change. So identify what people need and make sure they get it. Basically though, I would also say that to be successful for enablement, you need to create an environment of continuous feedback. It's no good to you. Well, it's good, but it's not great if you get to an end of a period of time, you're having a meeting so people can be accountable, explain what they did. Someone gets up and says, yeah, we were successful in this thing, but we were fundamentally blocked by this other thing. If you find out about it at the end, that's a failure. You need to be hearing about this as early as possible so that you can find ways to unblock those teams, make them successful, or perhaps, admit that the mandate is wrong, the thing you're trying to drive is wrong, and adapt given the new knowledge that you have. So that's really what I wanted to talk about in terms of driving engineering change, driving technical change. Now, to make those things happen, of course, there's a whole raft of other things you're going to need to do to work well with individuals to make those things happen. So I want to spend the last part of this talk really focusing on that. So the first technique I want to talk about is seek first to understand, then be understood. And this, I think, is habit number 5 from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. And to explain why this is so valuable, I really like this quote from Dr. Covey. And he says that most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. And when I understood that, it really enlightened me a lot about how I communicate, how others communicate with me, some of the times when I've got involved in contentious discussions, understanding that this tends to be the way that people communicate. They listen with the intent to reply rather than understanding, really helped me to unlock that. Fundamentally, what Covey is saying is that understanding others, taking the time to really listen and understand other people's points of view, gives you greater influence and greater ability to influence them and get what you want done in a conversation. So, of course, you're probably asking yourself, how do I do this? And Covey proposes this idea called empathic listening. And it really has 3 parts to it: understand, reflect, clarifying questions. Firstly, of course, you just need to take the time to understand. Shut up and listen, frankly. Take the time to listen to what the other person is saying and really try and understand them. As you're listening to them, and when the time arises in the conversation, 2 ways will help you solidify your own understanding and let the other person know that you've really listened and understood to them. Those 2 techniques are reflection and clarifying questions. Reflection is simply repeat a portion of what that person has just said to you back to them. So you could say something like, so what I heard from you is that when you tried to do this thing, this went wrong, etc., etc., right? You're reflecting back to them, you're repeating what they said, probably in your own words. And the other technique is, again, when you get to a right point in the conversation, ask a clarifying question about what they've just said to you. Don't do either one of these techniques on their own because they're both just odd on their own. If you constantly reflect back to people, it's kind of weird. If you constantly just ask clarifying questions, it doesn't feel like you're listening. But a combination of those things, done subtly, will really reinforce to the person that you've understood them, and it will also help you reinforce your own understanding. I find when I do this, it puts me in a place where I'm far more able to listen to what the other person is saying and potentially adopt my own viewpoint before I've even stated it to them. Whereas if I'm coming into something with an intent just to reply, I'm much less open in my own mind to adopting new ideas. Once you've listened, once you've understood, respectfully state your point of view. This is a conversation. You're expected to be able to say what you think as well. And one final thing I'll say about this that I find really useful myself is to use questions rather than dictating a direction to people. I find for me, if I'm talking with teams of individuals about a practice or something I'd like them to try, I tend to find things go better rather than me saying, why don't you do this? Then I ask questions, what would it take to do this thing given the constraints we're operating under? And I'm kind of leading those people into the answer I want them to give. But still, it tends to lead to better results because they think they've come up with the idea rather than me giving it to them. And that makes people fundamentally, I think, more willing to try something. So the second concept I want to come up with here, I want to draw attention to, is this idea of your trust battery, paying attention to your trust battery. And this idea comes from Shopify, the Canadian e-commerce store, and they have this idea that every employee in the company has a trust battery. And every time you interact with another individual or team, that battery is either charged or discharged, depending on how that interaction goes. So this is a really useful way, I find, to think about how people see you at the company, how your colleagues see you, how you're seen amongst wider groups, how you're seen across an entire company. And the reason it's valuable is that fundamentally, as a very senior individual contributor, you need to be trusted to succeed. People have to believe that when you are persuading them to take a certain path, to try something, that you've thought this through, that you've understood it, that you know the consequences, and it's going to happen. You're going to follow through and make it happen. And of course, we all have many different trust batteries to manage. You can think about every relationship you have with a person has a different trust battery. Then every relationship you have with a team or a group in an organization has a different trust battery. So many, many different trust batteries need to be managed. But so not to drive yourself mad, I would suggest that not all trust batteries are equal at all times. You need to think about what are the key relationships I need to maintain right now to do what I'm trying to accomplish. and focus on those things primarily. It's okay to let some of these trust batteries take a back seat, so to speak, for a while. I think, again, if you let them get totally discharged, that's not a good thing, but just consider that not all of them have to be equal all of the time. So the next idea I want to give you is this idea of the organizational elevator. And this comes from a software architect called Gregor Hopper. And he presented this idea of an architect's elevator. Basically, he says that software architects need to be able to talk to every level of the company, from the most junior developers all the way up to the CEO. And he has this idea of the architecture elevator to allow you to visualize, go into different levels of the company to talk to these people. I think this is a great idea, and I think it's also highly relevant to anyone who's a senior individual contributor, because a key part of your job is going to be communicating effectively with different levels of your organization. The fundamental thing here to realize is that different people need different information from you. The CEO is probably not going to be interested, well, he may be interested, but doesn't need to know the implementation details of how a particular technique is going to work. A junior developer who is implementing the code doesn't need to know all of the details of the budget, the cost, where that money is coming from to provide the tools that they're going to use. Different people need to know different information from you. So the question you need to ask yourself as you ride the organizational elevator is, what does the person I'm talking to need to know to support me? What do they need to know to say yes? What do they need to know to give me the money I need to make these things happen? And if you can pitch your conversations using that idea, you are, I think, going to be more successful overall than if you go into a bunch of different conversations with different levels of the company and try and give them the same elevator pitch. So the next thing I think you need to work effectively with teams is to maintain technical depth while building breadth. And we already talked a little bit about how up to the level of senior developer, your primary focus has been writing code. It's been working in code, building technical depth. But that changes from principal developer or staff developer and up, because now you really need to build breadth. It's more important that you know lots, or I should say a little about lots of things than you know lots about a few things. It's more valuable to you that you know a little bit about 5 different queuing systems than you know a lot about one single one. And the reason that's valuable is that when somebody comes and asks you for advice, you're able to say to them, you know what, I don't know about this thing in depth, but it sounds like a good fit to your problem. Why don't you go and look at it? If you don't know about all the different tools in the toolbox, you'll only fall back to a few hammers to achieve what you're trying to do. And the paradox here is that while building breadth, you still need to maintain and to develop the depth that you've always had. There's always going to be a need for you to drop back into code, working with teams, working on projects individually sometimes. And to do that, you're still going to need to be technically excellent. It's quite a paradox because in many respects, you'll find yourself more highly skilled than you've ever been in your career before at this level, yet you'll have the least impact on a day-to-day basis in terms of the lines of code you write. The general principle here that I would sum this up with, that I try and follow, I always want to be at least one step ahead of the teams I'm working with. I've got a good sense of the technologies that are coming down the pipe, changes. I work a lot with Java, changes coming in Java that we're going to adopt soon, etc. New technologies our teams are going to be using, product-wise where we're going. And I try and put myself one step ahead of the teams so that when they get there, I can already advise them, at least to some degree, as to what would be the best way of working with these things. So try and be a step ahead of the teams you're working with. Spending one-on-one time with developers and teams. I can't tell you how important this is. And it might seem difficult to you because there'll be huge numbers of demands on your time. You'll be being pulled in all kinds of different directions. But it's exceptionally easy for you to lose touch with what's going on with the people who are writing the code. And I think this is massively important because spending time with these people, with developers and teams, will help you to keep your skills and knowledge current. It helps you to see the level of skills and knowledge on the teams. Where do you need to invest to help level people up? It helps you understand the issues teams are facing. It allows you to exchange knowledge. You can learn from them just as much as they can learn from you. Create an environment where that can happen is the key. It means that you don't lose touch. And fundamentally as well, Spending time one-on-one with developers and teams will build trust in you. It will build trust that you have skills needed so that when they face problems, when they need advice, they won't be reticent about coming to ask you for it. You need to identify who are the key individuals and teams for you to spend time with, and that will constantly shift, depending on your hiring, who you need to influence, the features teams are working on, the technologies, the products we're shipping, all of these things. But at any one time, you don't have time to spend equal amounts of time with everyone. I mean, not in medium to large size organizations. I can't give part of my time regularly to 80 different individuals in product development that I work with. So I need to identify who do I need to be spending time with right now? Who can I have the biggest impact with by spending time with them? Basically, I would just say to you, reach out to people. Say, I'm going to book some time with you. Let's spend some time pairing, or let's spend some time mobbing with the team, or even if you just observe how that team works together. Most people, when you explain to them what you're looking to do, you want to understand how they're doing so you can help them. They won't be at all reticent about accepting this. So just reach out and make the time happen. Book some time in people's calendars. So the next idea I want to bring up here is demonstration defeats discussion. And as I said earlier, typically, we hire very, very intelligent people because that's what we need to get the job done. But this does lead to a lot of discussion, and sometimes it can feel like even driving the simplest change, making the simplest suggestion leads to hours and hours of conversation with people about why what you're suggesting is valuable, or so on and so on. And in those situations, I find that it's often quicker to just demonstrate. If it's taking a long time for people to understand why I'm suggesting something, where I'm coming from, I just prefer to drop back into the code and just show them how it enables me, how it's better. Because demonstrating, seeing the code is often believing. And again, people approach new ideas with skepticism. You'll often find as well that demonstration on its own isn't enough. You have to persuade people to, once you've demonstrated, just to try it. Put it in the code base, try it out, see how it works, live with it for a while. That tends to win over people. But anytime you find that making a decision is taking longer than just doing it, demonstrate. I've been involved in some conversations, and afterwards I've been with my managers and been like, what? In the time that conversation took, I could have done the thing 3 times. It can get a little ridiculous sometimes. In those cases, just drop back and demonstrate. And I think often a good way of doing this is pairing. If you're mobbing with a team, set yourself up. If you're meeting with a team, set yourself up so that you're navigating, not driving, and have someone else drive it. Because as they're typing the code, they can start to see the value in an idea. So, even given all of these things, I have to say, you will occasionally fail. And that's because change involves experimentation. And by its very definition of the word, an experiment is something that we do not know is going to succeed 100% of the time. So you will occasionally fail. You will occasionally crash and burn. I think, though, the most important thing about failure is being open about it. If you're involved in a change where you're not sure what the outcome is going to be, you're not sure if it's going to work, tell everyone. Make it clear. Tell everyone from management down to the developers, I don't know if this is going to work. Can we try it out? Because then you're being fully open. You're saying, I don't know if this is going to work or not. Now, I'm not saying to you that every single thing you drive should come with that caveat. You really need to decide when is failure acceptable. If you're driving a critical project for the company, which is time-bound, which is huge cost if there's a failure, clearly failure is not acceptable there, right? But if you're trying out an engineering practice, if you're trying to persuade people to do more of something they're already doing, and we're not sure if there's going to be a great value in it, set things up so that people are aware that this might fail. Choose when failure is acceptable. Failure will have an impact on your trust battery. How you manage that failure will determine how great of an impact there is on that trust battery. So that's all I have for you today. And firstly, thank you all very much for listening. As I said earlier, I'd really love to hear different ideas and techniques that you use to work with other individuals in your organizations. So please reach out to me, send me a tweet, send me an email, whatever you like. And I'm really hoping there's going to be an environment now that Stefan has set up where we can take questions. So hopefully you'll get to converse with me in real time at some point in the next couple of minutes, and I can very happily answer any questions you have. So until then, once again, thank you very much.